The CEO trailed her, expecting to uncover theft or deception. Instead, three little boys in matching pajamas running to embrace their exhausted mother rendered him utterly speechless. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. The first time Gabriella Johnson noticed Michael Thompson across the crowded hotel ballroom, she told herself it was nothing more than professional observation. As assistant manager at the Thompson Grand Hotel, it was her job to ensure every detail of the charity gala ran flawlessly, especially when the hotel's namesake heir was in attendance. Water glasses refilled at table 7, she murmured into her discreet headset, dark eyes never lingering too long on the tall figure in the bespoke suit who stood laughing with the mayor. At 26, Gabriella had clawed her way up from the housekeeping staff to become the youngest assistant manager in the luxury hotel chain's history. For a girl from the rougher parts of Brooklyn whose mother had cleaned these same rooms until arthritis claimed her hands, the achievement was remarkable. But tonight, as she directed staff with quiet efficiency, she felt the familiar weight of being simultaneously visible and invisible, seen enough to be desired, invisible enough to be kept secret. Michael caught her eye across the room and raised his champagne glass slightly. The subtle gesture sent an electric current through her body that she'd never admit to anyone, least of all herself. 3 hours later, after the last guest had departed and the staff began dismantling the elaborate decorations, Gabriella felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. The text was simple: Penthouse, 11:30. She shouldn't go. She had promised herself after last time that it would be the final encounter. 6 months of clandestine meetings in his penthouse, whispered promises during intimate dinners in private rooms of exclusive restaurants, passionate nights in luxury hotel suites when he visited other cities on business, all conducted in shadows, away from the society pages that tracked the heir to the Thompson fortune and aspiring state senator. Yet at precisely 11:30, Gabriella stood in the private elevator ascending to the penthouse suite. She had changed from her manager's uniform to a simple black dress, elegant but understated, like the relationship itself. "There she is," Michael said when the doors opened, his voice warm with the confidence of old money and unquestioned privilege. At 32, he was devastatingly handsome, with the kind of chiseled features that appeared in business magazines under headlines like 30 Under 30 and The Future of American Enterprise. "You were watching me all night," she said, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "Can you blame me?" He pulled her close, one hand tracing the curve of her spine. "You run that place better than people twice your age. It's impressive." This was what had drawn her in initially, not just his looks or wealth, but the way he seemed to see her capability, her intelligence, the way he spoke about her potential, as if doors would simply open for her as they always had for him. Later, as they lay tangled in the sheets of his king-sized bed, Manhattan glittering beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, Gabriella allowed herself to imagine a future where these moments weren't stolen, where what they shared could exist in daylight. "You're thinking too loud," Michael murmured against her neck. "I'm just happy," she lied, knowing instinctively that voicing her true thoughts would shatter whatever this was between them. The memory of that night, and dozens like it, played through Gabriella's mind as she stood in the January snow outside her doctor's office 6 weeks later, staring at the paper that confirmed what her body had already been telling her. Pregnant. And not just pregnant. Expecting triplets. 3 heartbeats where there should have been one. The world tilted beneath her feet as she grabbed a nearby bench for support. 3 children. Michael's children. Their children. That evening, with trembling hands and a heart beating wildly in her chest, Gabriella rode the now familiar private elevator to Michael's Upper East Side penthouse. Snow fell heavily outside, coating Manhattan in pristine white that belied the turmoil within her. Michael greeted her with his usual smile, though it faltered when he saw her expression. "You look serious tonight," he said, moving to the bar to pour himself a whiskey. "Drink?" "No, I can't," she said, the words catching in her throat. Michael turned, eyebrow raised. "Can't? That's new." He swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass, ice cubes clinking gently. "Everything okay at work? You're not getting cold feet about the manager position opening up, are you? Because I told you just say the word and—" "I'm pregnant," Gabriella interrupted, pulling the ultrasound from her purse. "With triplets." The silence that followed was absolute. Michael's face, usually so controlled in negotiations and press conferences, cycled through shock, disbelief, and something darker that made Gabriella's stomach clench. "That's impossible," he finally said, downing his whiskey in one swallow. "We were careful. Not careful enough, apparently." She held out the ultrasound. 3 babies, Michael. I saw them today. Heard their heartbeats." Michael didn't take the image. Instead, he turned away, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the snow-covered city. His reflection stared back, jaw tight, eyes cold. "This is absolutely impossible for me right now," he said, his voice taking on the crisp, detached tone she'd heard him use in business calls. "I'm months away from announcing my Senate run. The international expansion investors are finalizing the details this week." He poured another whiskey, still not looking at her. "A black hotel employee from Brooklyn with my children would ruin my political and business future." Each word landed like a physical blow. Gabriella stood frozen, the ultrasound still extended in her hand, her dignity hanging by a thread. "I thought—" she began, then stopped, unsure what she had thought. That he would be surprised but ultimately happy? That this would force their relationship into the open? That he loved her? Michael finally turned to face her, his expression now carefully composed. "You were fun, Gabriella," he said, the casual cruelty landing precisely as intended. "But you were never more than a diversion. You're not enough for the life I've planned. You'd never be accepted at the galleries, the campaign events, the board meetings." He paused deliberately, looking her up and down. "Frankly, you're too ordinary for the Thompson legacy." Gabriella felt something inside her harden, calcify. The ultrasound dropped to her side as she straightened her spine, refusing to let him see her shatter. Michael moved to his mahogany desk, opened a drawer, and withdrew a checkbook. With practiced ease, he wrote out a sum, signed it with a flourish, and slid the check across the polished surface. $20,000, he said, as if discussing the weather. "Take care of the problem and don't contact me again. My lawyers would be happy to explain the legal consequences if you try to call me after this." When Gabriella made no move to take the check, Michael pressed a button on his desk intercom. "Frank, my guest is leaving. See her to the nearest subway station." "The subway?" Gabriella found her voice incredulous. "It's snowing, Michael." "Exactly where you belong, Gabriella," he replied, already picking up his phone to dial. "Back to your world, where you should have stayed from the beginning. You're just a temporary burden, someone who could never belong in my world." The security guard appeared at the door, his expression carefully neutral. As Gabriella was escorted out, she could hear Michael already discussing a campaign meeting, as if she had never existed at all. In the back seat of the black town car, she caught the driver's pitying glance in the rearview mirror. The snow had intensified, turning New York into a treacherous landscape of white. When the car stopped near a Harlem subway station, far from her Brooklyn apartment, Gabriella clutched the $20,000 check, her trembling hand slightly crumpling the paper. The walk down the subway stairs was treacherous, her sensible work shoes slipping on the icy steps. Underground, waiting for the train that would carry her back to Brooklyn, Gabriella stood surrounded by late-night commuters, invisible in her grief. The subway car's harsh fluorescent lights highlighted her reflection in the dark windows. A young woman alone, hands protectively covering her still flat stomach. In the solitude of her small Brooklyn apartment, while the storm howled outside, Gabriella stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. 3 lives grew inside her, 3 reasons to keep going. She pressed her palm against her abdomen, feeling nothing yet but knowing everything had changed. That night, between silent tears, she made a promise that would echo through the next 15 years. "One day, Michael Thompson, you will kneel before what you rejected." The months that followed were brutal. 2 weeks after the penthouse confrontation, Gabriella was called into the hotel manager's office and informed of a restructuring that eliminated her position. The severance package was generous but finite. As her pregnancy began to show, every job interview ended with vague promises to call that never materialized. Temporarily living on her cousin's couch in Harlem, Gabriella worked as a data entry clerk during the day and waitressed at night, even as her feet swelled and morning sickness lasted well into evening shifts. Each ultrasound showing her 3 healthy sons strengthened her resolve. One evening, sitting at her cousin's kitchen table, Gabriella took out the check Michael had given her. $20,000. A sum that had seemed enormous once, now revealed as insultingly inadequate for bringing 3 children into the world. With methodical precision, she tore the check into microscopic pieces, saving only a fragment with Michael's signature in a small wooden box. That piece of paper would be her reminder, not of weakness, but of the moment she decided she would build something extraordinary, not for revenge, but because her children deserved a mother who wasn't broken by abandonment. The turning point came during her 7th month of pregnancy. While inputting orders at the diner where she waitressed, a customer noticed her exceptional typing speed. "You enter data faster than anyone I've ever seen," the man said, introducing himself as the owner of a struggling small software development company. "My administrative assistant just quit, and I need someone who can keep up with our workflow." He offered her a part-time position with remote work flexibility after the babies were born. It wasn't much, but it was a window into a world Michael had never imagined she could penetrate. 15 years later, when the spotlights of the Metropolitan Gala illuminated Gabriella Johnson's face as the CEO of a billion-dollar company, Michael Thompson would finally understand the true value of what he had dismissed as insufficient. The next morning, Gabriella stared at the positive pregnancy test on her bathroom counter, the reality of her situation sinking deeper into her bones. 3 lives depended on her now. 3 reasons to rise above Michael Thompson's cruel dismissal. Outside her window, New York continued its relentless pace, unaware that her world had been irrevocably altered. 2 weeks later, Gabriella sat perfectly straight in the hotel manager's office, hands folded protectively over her still flat stomach. The woman across the desk couldn't quite meet her eyes. "I'm afraid we're implementing some restructuring changes," she said, sliding a folder across the polished surface. "Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." "Restructuring?" Gabriella repeated, the word hollow. "I just received a performance review last month with recommendations for promotion." The manager shifted uncomfortably. "These decisions come from corporate. The severance package is generous, 3 months salary plus benefits continuation through the quarter." Gabriella knew exactly where the decision had come from, not corporate, but the penthouse. She accepted the folder with steady hands, refusing to show any emotion that might be reported back to Michael. "I understand," she said, rising from her chair. "I'll clear my desk immediately." As she walked through the hotel's service exit one last time, cardboard box containing her meager office belongings in hand, Gabriella caught sight of the main entrance. Michael stood in the marble lobby, laughing with a group of executives, his hand clasping shoulders and shaking hands. He never glanced toward the service corridor where she stood frozen, watching the architect of her dismissal continuing his charmed existence without a second thought for the lives he had altered. The following weeks brought a parade of rejection. Gabriella sat in a stiff chair at Horizon Hotels, watching the interviewer's expression shift as he glanced at her updated resume. "Your qualifications are impressive, Ms. Johnson, but the position requires evening availability and considerable physical stamina." His eyes dropped briefly to her midsection, where her pregnancy was just beginning to show at 12 weeks. We'll keep your resume on file." This scene repeated itself across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. Each interview began with enthusiasm over her experience and ended with vague promises once her pregnancy became apparent. By her 4th month, carrying triplets made her look 6 months pregnant, and the interviews stopped resulting even in courtesy callbacks. "You can stay as long as you need," her cousin Tanya insisted, making up the living room couch with fresh sheets. The 1-bedroom apartment in Harlem was barely big enough for Tanya and her 7-year-old son, let alone adding a pregnant woman expecting triplets. "We'll figure something out." Gabriella stared at the ceiling that night, listening to the radiator clank and hiss. Her savings were evaporating. The severance would cover perhaps 2 more months of expenses. Her health insurance would expire just as she entered her 3rd trimester with a high-risk pregnancy. On the coffee table beside her makeshift bed sat the torn remnants of Michael's check, a symbol of everything she refused to accept. "I need 2 jobs," she announced to Tanya the next morning. "Something with flexible hours that won't care I'm pregnant." By the end of the week, Gabriella had secured a position as a data entry clerk at a medical billing office and evening shifts at a diner 10 blocks from Tanya's apartment. The billing office was a windowless room with fluorescent lights that exacerbated her pregnancy migraines, but the supervisor cared only about typing speed and accuracy, not her expanding waistline. 78 words per minute with 99% accuracy, the supervisor noted during her training. That's impressive. The diner job was harder physically. By the end of each 6-hour shift, Gabriella's ankles swelled so severely that removing her shoes became an exercise in pain management. Morning sickness, which cruelly lasted all day, meant frequent bathroom breaks between serving plates of greasy burgers and bottomless coffee refills. "You should be home resting, not working doubles," the cook remarked one evening, sliding an extra plate of food across the counter. "On the house. Those babies need feeding." Gabriella ate standing up, one hand supporting her increasingly unwieldy belly. "Those babies need health insurance and a place to live," she replied, but accepted the food gratefully. Each prenatal appointment brought equal measures of joy and terror. At 20 weeks, the ultrasound technician pointed out 3 distinct heartbeats, 3 spines, 3 perfect profiles. "All boys," the technician announced, smiling, "and they all look healthy." Gabriella stared at the screen, tears streaming down her face. 3 sons, 3 lives that Michael Thompson had dismissed as a problem to be solved with a check. "They're fighters," the obstetrician noted during her 28-week checkup. "Triplets often come early, but these boys are growing right on schedule. You're doing everything right, Ms. Johnson." What she was doing was working 60-hour weeks while sleeping on a couch, eating whatever she could afford, and falling asleep each night with pregnancy books propped against her belly. Her hands had developed calluses from typing and carrying heavy trays. Her once manicured nails were cut short and practical. The designer clothes from her hotel management days had been sold online to pay for prenatal vitamins and maternity clothes from thrift stores. One rainy April evening in her 7th month, Gabriella balanced 3 plates along her arm while inputting an order on the diner's ancient computer system. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating the clunky software with practiced efficiency. "That's impressive," a voice remarked from the counter. "You type faster than most programmers I know." Gabriella glanced up to see a middle-aged man in a rumpled button-down shirt watching her hands. "Years of practice," she replied, continuing to type without looking at the keyboard. The man introduced himself as David Chen, owner of a small software development company in Queens. "My administrative assistant quit last week and I've been drowning in paperwork. The way you handle that system, inputting orders while balancing plates and remembering modifications, it's exactly the kind of multitasking I need." Gabriella laughed, one hand automatically moving to support her lower back. "I'm not exactly in prime hiring condition, Mr. Chen. When are you due?" "June, if I'm lucky. They usually come early." He studied her thoughtfully. "The position is part-time, 25 hours a week, with flexibility to work remotely after they're born. Health insurance kicks in after 30 days. Gabriella nearly dropped the coffee pot she was refilling. Health insurance? Full coverage. My wife had complications with our second child. I wouldn't expect anyone to work without proper medical care. For the first time in months, Gabriella felt something beyond survival mode, a flicker of possibility. I should warn you, I'm having triplets. David's eyebrows shot up, then he laughed. Well, that explains the multitasking skills. If you can manage triplets, you can certainly handle my disorganized filing system. 2 weeks later, Gabriella sat at a desk in a small, cluttered office in Queens. The software company occupied half a floor in an aging building, with mismatched furniture and computers that had seen better days. But the chair had been adjusted to accommodate her pregnancy, the health insurance paperwork was processed on her first day, and her new boss genuinely didn't seem to care that she would need maternity leave in less than 2 months. Just learn the systems before you go, David explained, showing her the company's client database. If you can handle basic administrative tasks remotely after the babies come, that's all I need until you're ready to return. The medical billing job had been reluctantly sacrificed. The commute between 3 locations would have been impossible, but the diner manager allowed her to keep weekend shifts. Between the 2 jobs, Gabriella could afford to rent a tiny 1-bedroom apartment in a walk-up building in Brooklyn. The apartment was barely 500 square feet, with pipes that clanged and windows that leaked cold air, but it was hers. The day she moved in, Tanya helped her assemble 3 second-hand cribs purchased from a church donation center. They dominated the bedroom, leaving just enough space for a twin mattress on the floor beside them. "It's perfect," Gabriella insisted when she saw Tanya's concerned expression. "It's our beginning." That night, alone in her new apartment, Gabriella opened the small wooden box where she kept the fragment of Michael's check. His signature, elegant and flowing, stared up at her, the mark of a man who believed money could erase responsibilities, who thought her unworthy of standing beside him. "Your loss," she whispered, closing the box and placing it on the highest shelf of the apartment's single closet. "They'll never need your name or your money." She spent the weekend scouring second-hand shops for baby essentials, calculating formula costs versus her limited ability to breastfeed triplets, and researching childcare options that seemed increasingly impossible on her budget. The magnitude of raising 3 children alone in New York City was overwhelming, but each kick and somersault inside her reinforced her determination. On a sweltering June morning, exactly 35 weeks into her pregnancy, Gabriella's water broke during her shift at Chen Software Solutions. David drove her to the hospital himself, calling ahead to ensure her obstetrician would meet them there. 14 hours later, Brandon, Brian, and Benjamin Johnson entered the world. 3 identical boys with perfect fingers and toes, each weighing just over 4 pounds. They were immediately whisked to the NICU, where they would spend their first 3 weeks growing strong enough to go home. Gabriella, exhausted but determined, pumped breast milk every 3 hours and spent every possible moment in the NICU, talking softly to her sons. Each boy already showed distinct personalities. Brandon, the firstborn, seemed perpetually alert, observing everything. Brian was the most physically active. Benjamin, the smallest, was calm and watchful. "They're fighters," the NICU nurse remarked. "Must take after their mother." When Gabriella finally brought her sons home to the tiny Brooklyn apartment, she had transformed the space with military precision. The bedroom now contained only the 3 cribs, a changing table fashioned from a repurposed dresser, and storage containers neatly labeled with each baby's name. Her own mattress had been moved to the living room, which also served as her office for the remote work David had arranged. That first night alone with her 3 newborns, Gabriella sat in the rocking chair she'd found on a curb and refinished herself. Brandon and Brian slept peacefully in their cribs, while Benjamin, always the one needing extra attention, dozed against her chest. "We made it," she whispered to her sleeping son, "and this is just the beginning." The small software company on the verge of bankruptcy would become the first step on a ladder that would take Gabriella to heights that Michael Thompson, in all his arrogance, would never achieve. October 12th arrived with the kind of brilliant autumn sunshine that made even Brooklyn's aging buildings look majestic. Gabriella Johnson sat in the hospital room, exhausted beyond measure, yet filled with a strange electric energy. In her arms, she cradled Benjamin, the smallest of her 3 newborn sons, while nurses tended to Brandon and Brian in their bassinets. "They're all doing wonderfully," the nurse assured her, adjusting Brandon's monitoring equipment. "You'd never know they're triplets by how strong they are." Gabriella nodded, unable to form words through the tangle of emotions. These 3 perfect beings had grown inside her despite every obstacle, despite the abandonment, the financial struggles, the physical toll on her body. They had persevered, just as she had. After a week in the hospital, ensuring all 3 boys were gaining weight properly, Gabriella was finally cleared to take her sons home. The tiny Brooklyn apartment welcomed 4 new residents instead of 1, its cramped quarters somehow expanding to embrace their presence. "It's not much," she whispered to her sleeping sons as she placed them carefully in their second-hand cribs, "but it's ours, and we're going to build something amazing together." The first months passed in a blur of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and precious little sleep. Gabriella developed a system of color-coded charts taped to the refrigerator, tracking each baby's feeding times, diaper changes, and sleeping patterns. Even in the depths of exhaustion, her organizational skills remained sharp. Working remotely for Chen Software Solutions during the baby's nap times, Gabriella found unexpected peace in the rhythm of data entry and administrative tasks. David Chen proved to be the rare employer who valued competence over convention, increasing her hours as she demonstrated her reliability despite the chaos of new motherhood. "I don't know how you manage it," Tanya remarked during one of her weekly visits, watching Gabriella type one-handed while cradling Brian against her shoulder. "3 babies and still working?" Gabriella smiled tiredly. "I don't have much choice. But honestly, I think better when I'm busy." The truth was more complex. Each report she filed, each spreadsheet she organized, each system she learned represented a step away from Michael's dismissal. "Too ordinary for the Thompson legacy," he had said. She would prove him wrong, not through confrontation, but through quiet, relentless competence. By the time the triplets reached 6 months old, Gabriella had established a routine that allowed her to increase her hours at Chen Software. The babies were thriving, 3 identical faces with bright, curious eyes that followed her movements around the apartment. Brandon, always the most assertive, had learned to roll over first. Brian's physical strength showed in his determined attempts to crawl. Benjamin, the observer, seemed content to watch his brother's explorations while developing startling vocal range. "They're remarkably advanced for their age," the pediatrician noted during their 6-month checkup, "especially considering they were premature." Gabriella beamed with pride. "They're determined," she said, watching Brandon attempting to dismantle the doctor's stethoscope. As the boy's first birthday approached, Gabriella noticed troubling signs at Chen Software. David appeared increasingly stressed during their video meetings, and mentions of cash flow challenges became more frequent. The small company had developed several promising applications, but struggled to compete with larger tech firms for valuable contracts. During late nights, after the boys were asleep, Gabriella began studying the company's financial reports that crossed her desk. Her hotel management experience had given her a solid foundation in business operations, and patterns soon emerged in the numbers. Patterns suggesting not just cash flow problems but potential fraud. One night, while feeding Benjamin during his 2 a.m. waking, Gabriella noticed an anomaly in the payment processing system. Multiple small transactions were being redirected through a secondary server before reaching the company's accounts, with fractional amounts skimmed from each transaction. The amounts were tiny, cents rather than dollars, but across thousands of transactions, they accumulated significantly. For 3 consecutive nights, while her sons slept, Gabriella immersed herself in online tutorials about payment processing systems and security protocols. What began as curiosity became obsession as she identified vulnerabilities in the company's software that allowed the skimming to occur. By the triplets' first birthday, celebrated with a small homemade cake and Tanya's family as the only guests, Gabriella had developed a rudimentary algorithm that could potentially detect and prevent the fraudulent activity. The question was whether to present it to David, potentially exposing her unauthorized investigation of company systems. Her decision was made for her 2 weeks later, when David called an emergency all-staff meeting. The dozen employees gathered in the main conference room, tension evident in their postures. Gabriella arranged for Tanya to watch the boys, sensing this meeting required her physical presence. "I'll be direct," David began, his normally cheerful demeanor subdued. "We're facing significant financial difficulties. Our latest contract bid was rejected, and our current cash flow won't sustain operations beyond 60 days. The room fell silent. Gabriella felt the weight of a dozen futures, including her own and her son's, hanging in the balance. "I've explored every option," David continued. "Without additional funding or a dramatic increase in revenue, we'll have to begin layoffs next week." Gabriella's hand rose before she had fully formulated her thoughts. "May I speak, David?" He nodded, surprise evident on his face. As an administrative assistant, she rarely contributed to strategic discussions. "I believe I've identified a significant problem with our payment processing system," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Someone has been skimming small amounts from transactions, possibly an employee or more likely an external hack." The room erupted in murmurs. David stared at her, shock giving way to focused attention. "Go on," he said. Taking a deep breath, Gabriella outlined the pattern she had discovered and the vulnerability that allowed it. Using the conference room's whiteboard, she sketched the data flow and the points of interception. "I've developed a preliminary algorithm that could detect and prevent this type of fraud," she concluded. "Based on my calculations, we're losing approximately $8,000 monthly through this exploit." A programmer raised his hand. "How did you even access these systems? That's not part of administrative work." Gabriella met his gaze steadily. "I noticed irregularities in the reports I process. Everything I accessed was through my regular login. I just looked more carefully than perhaps anyone expected." David's expression had transformed from despair to cautious hope. "You developed an algorithm? You're an administrative assistant with no formal programming training." "I have 3 babies who wake at different hours," she replied with a small smile. "I've had plenty of time to learn online while rocking them back to sleep." For the next 2 hours, Gabriella walked the technical team through her findings and proposed solution. What she lacked in formal training, she compensated for with meticulous attention to detail and practical understanding of how money moved through digital systems. By meeting's end, the lead programmer had confirmed her analysis and praised the elegance of her solution. David sat silently, watching the interaction with growing amazement. "Gabriella, would you stay behind?" he asked as the team dispersed with renewed energy and purpose. When they were alone, David studied her with new eyes. "You're wasted in administrative work," he said finally. "That algorithm could save this company." Gabriella thought of her 3 sons waiting at home, of the tiny apartment where they all shared one bedroom, of the second-hand clothes and furniture that defined their existence. "I'd like to implement it," she said, "but I have 3 one-year-olds at home and no childcare I can afford." David leaned forward. "What if we created a more flexible position for you? You could work primarily remotely, come in only for essential meetings, and—" He hesitated, then continued firmly. "I want to offer you 10% ownership in the company to implement and expand this system." Gabriella blinked, certain she had misheard. 10%? "David, I'm an administrative assistant." "No," he corrected. "You're the person who just saved this company from bankruptcy. 10% is frankly less than your solution is worth, but it's what we can offer now." 3 days later, Gabriella sat at her kitchen table, which doubled as her desk, signing paperwork that transformed her from employee to part owner of Chen's Software Solutions. In the living room, her 3 sons played in a makeshift playpen, occasionally demanding her attention with increasingly complex babbling. The implementation of Gabriella's fraud detection algorithm happened over the following weeks. Working closely with the programming team, she refined the system until it not only caught the existing fraud, but predicted and prevented similar attempts. The company's financial situation stabilized almost immediately as the hemorrhaging of funds ceased. By the triplets' 2nd birthday, Chen Software had secured 2 new contracts specifically because of the enhanced security features Gabriella had pioneered. Her position had evolved from administrative assistant to security solutions director, a title created specifically for her growing role in the company's operations. On a crisp autumn evening, while the boys played with blocks on the floor of their slightly larger apartment, the first upgrade their improved circumstances had allowed, Gabriella received an unexpected call from David. "We've been approached by FinSecure about our fraud detection system," he said without preamble. "They want to license the technology. The initial offer is $700,000 plus royalties." Gabriella sat down abruptly, watching her sons construct increasingly complex structures with their blocks. Brandon directed his brothers with authoritative pointing, Brian executed the physical placement, while Benjamin studied the architecture with serious concentration. "700,000? She repeated. "Your 10% would be 70,000 upfront plus ongoing royalties," David confirmed. "Gabriella, this is just the beginning. What you created during those midnight feedings is changing how payment security works." After ending the call, Gabriella joined her sons on the floor, helping Benjamin place a triangular block atop the tower his brothers had built. The structure wobbled but held, much like their lives since that snowy January day when Michael Thompson had declared her insufficient. As Brandon imperiously handed her another block, Gabriella thought about the algorithm created in the quiet darkness while her babies slept, the solution born from necessity and determination rather than formal education or privilege. The small apartment around them suddenly seemed like a temporary way station rather than their permanent circumstance. While signing her first contract as a partner, with the triplets playing in the improvised playpen in the office, Gabriella didn't imagine that the algorithm created during those lonely dawns would become the foundation of the technological empire that would one day make Michael Thompson beg for her attention. 7 years passed in a blur of growth, both for Gabriella's sons and for Chen Software Solutions. The small, struggling company had transformed into a respected mid-sized firm specializing in payment security, with offices now occupying an entire floor of their building. Gabriella's algorithm, refined and expanded over the years, had become the company's flagship product, protecting transactions for dozens of financial institutions across the East Coast. On a bright spring morning, Gabriella stood in her office, no longer a kitchen table in a cramped apartment, but a proper space with a door she could close when needed. Through the glass wall, she watched her team implementing the latest security update she had designed. At 33, she had grown into her role as Director of Security Solutions with the quiet confidence of someone who had built herself from scratch. "Ms. Johnson?" Her assistant appeared at the door. "The board meeting is starting in 5 minutes." Gabriella nodded, gathering her presentation materials. As she walked to the conference room, her phone chimed with a text from Tanya. "Boys crushed it at science fair. Brandon explaining quantum computing to the judge right now. Brian's solar battery actually works. Benjamin's design won visual category." A smile spread across her face as she read about her 7-year-old son's achievements. The triplets had shown extraordinary aptitude from their earliest years, speaking in full sentences before most children formed words, reading by age 3, and now excelling in academic areas that challenged children twice their age. The board meeting proceeded efficiently, with quarterly reports showing continued growth. David, now CEO of a company valued at over $30 million, beamed as Gabriella presented the security division's latest innovations. "And finally," she concluded, We've developed a predictive module that can identify potential breach patterns before they're fully executed. Initial testing shows a 93% accuracy rate." The board members nodded appreciatively. 7 years of consistent innovation had earned Gabriella their complete trust. After the meeting, David pulled her aside. "Got a minute?" They walked to his office, where he closed the door, a rare occurrence that immediately heightened Gabriella's awareness. "FinSecure contacted us again," he said without preamble. "They want to acquire the company, all of it." Gabriella sank into a chair. FinSecure, one of the largest financial security firms in the country, had been licensing their technology for years. "How much?" "42 million, David replied, his voice steady but his eyes revealing his excitement. "Your 10% would be 4.2 million, Gabriella finished automatically, her mind racing. The number seemed abstract, impossible to connect to the woman who had once counted coins for baby formula. "They want an answer within 30 days, David continued. "The board is inclined to accept, but I wanted to discuss it with you privately first. Your security protocols are the primary reason for their interest." Gabriella nodded slowly, thoughts swirling. "I need to process this." That evening, as she helped her sons with homework at the dining table of their modest 3-bedroom apartment in a safer Brooklyn neighborhood, Gabriella watched them with new eyes. Brandon, always the leader, was explaining a mathematical concept to his brothers with impressive clarity. Brian, the practical problem solver, built a demonstration using pencils and erasers. Benjamin, the thoughtful observer, asked questions that revealed deeper understanding than most adults would grasp. "Mom, are you listening?" Brandon demanded, noticing her distraction. "Sorry, sweetie. Work things," she replied, refocusing on his explanation. Later, after tucking the boys into bed, each in their own space now, though they still preferred to gather in one room for reading time, Gabriella sat on her living room sofa with her tablet. A notification drew her attention to a business news article. Thompson Enterprises announces expansion plans. CEO Michael Thompson engaged to socialite Victoria Reynolds. The photograph showed Michael looking exactly as she remembered. Handsome, polished, radiating the confidence of inherited privilege. His new fiancée, a willowy blonde from a banking dynasty, hung on his arm at some charity gala. Gabriella closed the article, surprised by her lack of emotional response. Once, seeing his face had triggered pain so acute it felt physical. Now, he seemed like a character from someone else's story, relevant only as biological contributor to her extraordinary sons. The following morning, she arrived early at the playground where she'd arranged to meet Tanya. Watching children climb and swing, Gabriella contemplated the decision before her. Selling her share would provide financial security beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Yet something felt unfinished. "You're thinking too loud again," Tanya said, appearing beside her with coffee cups in hand. "I recognize that face from when you were pregnant and plotting world domination from my couch." Gabriella laughed, accepting the coffee. "FinSecure wants to buy the company. My share would be over $4 million. Tanya nearly spilled her drink. "Holy, that's incredible." "It is," Gabriella agreed. "But I keep thinking, what if this isn't the end point? What if it's just a beginning?" Across the playground, the triplets had organized an impromptu game involving complex rules they appeared to be inventing on the fly. Brandon directed traffic, Brian built some kind of structure with sticks, and Benjamin mediated a dispute between two other children with diplomatic skill unusual for a 7-year-old. "They're extraordinary," Tanya murmured, following Gabriella's gaze. "They are," Gabriella agreed. "And they deserve more than just financial security. They deserve to see what's possible when you refuse to accept limitations others place on you." 2 weeks later, Gabriella sat across from David in his office, her decision made. "I'm selling my share," she said, "but not to stay with FinSecure. I want to start something new." David studied her, unsurprised. "I suspected as much. What's your vision?" "Small business cybersecurity. she replied without hesitation. The giants focus on corporations and governments, but small and medium businesses are increasingly targeted and can't afford enterprise-level protection. There's a market gap there, and a real need. The papers were signed the following month. As the acquisition completed, Gabriella found herself standing in the office lobby one last time, accepting hugs and well wishes from colleagues who had watched her rise from administrative assistant to the creator of the company's most valuable intellectual property. "You saved this company," David said as they shared a final handshake. "I can't wait to see what you build next." With her settlement from the acquisition secured, Gabriella leased a small office space in downtown Brooklyn. Nothing fancy, just a practical headquarters for what she envisioned. Johnson Tech Solutions began with just 3 employees. Gabriella herself, a gifted programmer she'd worked with at Chen Software, and a recent marketing graduate who understood the small business landscape. The first months tested her resolve. Potential clients were hesitant to trust security to a new, small company, regardless of her credentials. "We appreciate your presentation, Ms. Johnson, but we prefer to work with more established firms," became a common refrain. Each rejection fueled her determination. Working late into nights after helping with homework and bedtime routines, Gabriella refined her approach. Rather than competing directly with security giants, she developed streamlined, affordable solutions specifically designed for businesses with limited IT resources. The breakthrough came during a healthcare conference where Gabriella had secured a small exhibition booth. While major security firms showcased elaborate systems with flashy demonstrations, she offered free vulnerability assessments to attendees. Most small medical practices can't afford enterprise security, but they handle sensitive patient data every day, she explained to a skeptical practice manager. "We've designed protection specifically scaled for your needs and budget." By the conference's end, she had scheduled 12 consultations, including with a regional network of community clinics facing increasing ransomware threats. 2 weeks later, Gabriella stood before the clinic network's board, competing against 2 established security firms for their contract. She had prepared meticulously, studying their specific vulnerabilities and creating a customized protection plan. "The other proposals offer excellent protection," she acknowledged during her presentation, "but they're designed for hospital systems with dedicated IT departments. You need security that your existing staff can implement and maintain without specialized training." She demonstrated her solution's intuitive interface, showing how front desk staff could manage basic security functions while more complex protections ran automatically in the background. "Most importantly," she concluded, "our system costs 60% less than our competitors while providing the specific protections your network needs." The following day, the call came. Johnson Tech Solutions had secured its first major client. The contract wasn't huge by industry standards, but it was transformative for a startup. That evening, Gabriella bought a grocery store cake and gathered her sons around their kitchen table. "What are we celebrating?" Brian asked, eyeing the chocolate frosting. "The official beginning of our future," Gabriella replied, cutting generous slices. "Johnson Tech Solutions just landed its first big client." "Does this mean we're rich?" Brandon asked practically. Gabriella laughed. "Not yet, but it means we're building something important, together." Benjamin, always the most perceptive, studied his mother's face. "You look different, happier." "I am happy," she confirmed. "This is just the first step." As the boys debated how the company earnings should be spent, Brandon advocating for investments, Brian suggesting equipment upgrades, and Benjamin proposing donations to their school, Gabriella watched them with profound satisfaction. The path from that snowy night when Michael Thompson had dismissed her as ordinary to this moment had been arduous but transformative. That night, after the boys were asleep, Gabriella sat at her computer finalizing the implementation plan for the clinic network. On her screen, a notification appeared. Another news item about Thompson Enterprises breaking ground on a new development. She closed it without reading, her focus entirely on the future she was building. The small office with 3 desks and an improvised logo would grow in just 5 years to occupy an entire skyscraper in Manhattan, with the name Johnson shining on top of the building directly visible from the windows of Thompson Enterprises. The name Johnson illuminated the Manhattan skyline each night, but to Gabriella, the most important achievement still happened in the quiet moments at home. 3 years had transformed Johnson Tech Solutions from a promising startup into a respected mid-sized security firm with 58 employees and a growing client base across 3 states. The modest Brooklyn office had expanded twice, now occupying a full floor in a commercial building with actual conference rooms instead of repurposed closets. Gabriella surveyed her office with quiet satisfaction, the morning sun illuminating the space she'd designed to balance professionalism with personal comfort. Unlike the sterile corporate environments she'd once worked in, her walls featured framed artwork created by Benjamin, equations scribbled by Brandon, and prototype diagrams drawn by Brian. At 36, she carried herself with the earned confidence of someone who had built something substantial from nothing. "Ms. Johnson, your 10 o'clock is here," her assistant announced through the intercom. The meeting with potential investors proceeded smoothly, Gabriella presenting growth projections with the methodical clarity that had become her trademark. As she walked the group through security innovations her team had developed, she noticed the subtle shift in their posture. The moment skepticism transformed into genuine interest. "Your approach to predictive security is unlike anything we've seen in the mid-market space," commented the lead investor, studying the prototype demonstration. "Most firms your size are simply implementing watered-down versions of enterprise solutions." Gabriella smiled. "We're not trying to be a smaller version of the giants. Small and medium businesses have unique security needs that deserve purpose-built solutions." After the investors departed, promising follow-up discussions, Gabriella checked her phone. 3 texts awaited her, one from each son's teacher, a common occurrence that still amazed her. The boys, though identical in appearance, had been placed in separate classrooms to foster individual development. "Brandon demonstrated remarkable analytical skills during today's math challenge," read the first message. "He identified pattern relationships that most middle schoolers wouldn't recognize." The second, "Brian's solar-powered water filtration project is exceptional. He's not just theorizing, he's built a working prototype." And finally, "Benjamin's artwork combining technology themes with environmental concerns has been selected for the district exhibition. His artist statement shows unusual depth for a 10-year-old. Pride warmed Gabriella's chest as she scrolled through the messages. Her sons, now in 4th grade, continually astonished their teachers with abilities far beyond their years. The tiny babies who had once fit in the crook of her arm now built robots, programmed simple games, and engaged in discussions about topics she sometimes needed to research herself. That evening, she arrived home to find all 3 boys hunched over laptops at the dining table, their identical faces illuminated by screen glow, their expressions intense with concentration. "Mom's home," Benjamin announced without looking up, his peripheral awareness always slightly sharper than his brother's. Brandon barely nodded, fingers flying across his keyboard. "Give me 2 minutes to finish this analysis." Brian glanced up briefly. "Mom, I need your opinion on this circuit design." Gabriella set down her briefcase, taking in the chaos of papers, circuit boards, and empty juice boxes scattered across the table. "What happened to hello and how was your day?" All 3 boys looked up simultaneously, their synchronized movements still occasionally unnerving even after 10 years. They offered variations of greeting and welcome home before immediately pulling her into their projects. "Look at this data pattern I found," Brandon said, turning his laptop toward her. "If you analyze last month's security logs from your Cleveland client, there's a recurring access attempt that doesn't fit normal user behavior." Gabriella frowned, studying the screen. Her son had apparently been analyzing security logs from her company's client database, access he definitely shouldn't have had. "Brandon, how did you get into these logs?" He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Your password isn't that complex, Mom. And your second authentication is tied to your phone, which you leave charging in the kitchen every night." "We didn't access anything confidential," Brian added quickly. "Just the anonymized pattern data." Gabriella sighed, making a mental note to implement stricter security protocols at home. "We'll discuss appropriate boundaries later. For now, show me what you found." The pattern Brandon had identified was subtle but concerning. A series of login attempts that, individually, appeared normal but collectively suggested a coordinated probe of the system's defenses. "How long did it take you to spot this?" she asked, impressed despite her concerns about their unauthorized access. "About 20 minutes, Brandon shrugged. "But that's not the interesting part. Brian and Benjamin helped me build something better." Brian eagerly pulled his laptop forward. "We created a detection algorithm that looks for behavioral anomalies rather than just signature-based attacks. It's basically artificial intelligence that learns what normal user behavior looks like and flags deviations." "Show me," Gabriella said, pulling up a chair. For the next hour, she watched in growing amazement as her sons demonstrated a rudimentary but remarkably effective security system. Brandon had built the analytical framework, Brian had created the practical implementation, and Benjamin had designed an interface that visualized threats in an intuitive, almost artistic representation. "We worked on it during spring break," Benjamin explained, showing how the visualization changed colors and patterns based on threat levels. "Brandon said your existing systems were too reactive, so we thought about ways to make them predictive instead." Gabriella stared at her 10-year-old sons, a strange mixture of pride, awe, and mild terror washing over her. What they had created during a week of vacation was more innovative than projects her professional team had spent months developing. "This is," she began, searching for words that wouldn't inflate their already considerable confidence. "Potentially quite significant, but it would need extensive testing and refinement before it could be implemented." "We've already tested it against last year's data," Brandon countered. "It identified 92% of the breaches that actually occurred, with a false positive rate of only 7%. That night, after homework completion and 3 separate bedtime negotiations, Gabriella sat in her home office reviewing the boys' creation more thoroughly. Their algorithm, though clearly developed by children, contained conceptual innovations that experienced programmers might overlook precisely because they followed conventional security thinking. The following morning, she called an emergency meeting with her development team. Without revealing the source, she presented the core concepts of what her sons had created. "This is the direction we need to explore," she explained, showing the rudimentary predictive model. "Reactive security isn't enough anymore. We need systems that anticipate vulnerabilities before they're exploited." Her lead developer studied the prototype with narrowed eyes. "This architecture is unusual. It doesn't follow standard security protocols, but that's actually what makes it interesting. Where did this come from?" "Let's just say it was developed by unconventional thinkers," Gabriella replied carefully. Over the next month, Johnson Tech Solutions' development team refined and expanded the core algorithm created in her dining room. The professional version maintained the conceptual brilliance of the original while adding layers of sophistication and reliability. When tested against industry benchmarks, it outperformed security systems created by companies 10 times their size. Meanwhile, at home, the triplets had transformed the basement into an improvised laboratory. With Gabriella's reluctant permission and strict security protocols for any company data they accessed, they continued refining their original idea, often working late into evenings and weekends. "Mom, come see what we added," Brian called up the stairs one Saturday afternoon. "We've incorporated emotional analysis into the threat detection." Descending into the basement lab, Gabriella found all 3 boys surrounded by monitors, circuit boards, and notebooks filled with equations and diagrams that looked more like graduate-level work than elementary school projects. "Emotional analysis?" she questioned, accepting the chair Benjamin pulled out for her. Users have emotional signatures in how they interact with systems, Brandon explained. Keystroke patterns, mouse movements, session timing, they all change based on emotional states. And attackers have different emotional signatures than legitimate users, Brian continued. They exhibit stress markers, especially when attempting unauthorized access. Benjamin pointed to his screen, showing a visualization that resembled a heat map of human emotions. This represents emotional states detected through interaction patterns. See how different the attacker signature looks compared to normal users? Gabriella studied the screens, a mixture of amazement and maternal concern washing over her. While their peers were playing video games and riding bikes, her sons were developing emotional recognition algorithms for cybersecurity. Their childhood, while materially comfortable now, was profoundly unusual. "This is brilliant," she acknowledged, "but I want you all to remember something important. Your children first, security experts second. Have you been outside at all today?" 3 identical faces looked at her with varying degrees of indignation. "We went to the park yesterday," Brandon protested. "For 15 minutes," Gabriella countered, "to test whether distance affected your remote access to the home server." The following week, Gabriella faced a critical decision. A major government contractor had requested a proposal for a comprehensive security solution, representing the largest potential contract in her company's history. The proposal deadline coincided with the Triplets School Science Fair, an event they had been preparing for extensively. After considerable deliberation, she arranged for her lead developer to present the proposal while she attended the science fair. Some opportunities she had learned were more precious than others. The elementary school gymnasium buzzed with activity as students presented projects ranging from basic volcano models to surprisingly sophisticated experiments. The Triplets display stood out immediately, a comprehensive security system that monitored access to the school's water fountains, identifying users by their approach patterns and documenting water consumption to promote conservation. "Ms. Johnson, could I speak with you?" The principal approached, expression serious. "Your son's project is, well, it's considerably beyond grade level." Gabriella nodded, having anticipated this conversation. "They're very interested in technology." "This isn't just interest," the principal replied. "This is extraordinary aptitude. Our district psychologist has reviewed their recent assessments, and all 3 test well above high school level in mathematics and logical reasoning. We'd like to discuss accelerated placement options." Later that evening, as Gabriella prepared dinner, her phone rang with news from the office. They had won the government contract, largely due to the innovative predictive security system based on her son's original concept. Across the kitchen, the Triplets huddled over a new diagram, already discussing improvements to their science fair project. Benjamin looked up, his perceptive eyes catching something in her expression. "Good news, Mom?" Gabriella nodded, a complex emotion filling her chest. "Very good news. The technology you boys created, the professional version my team developed, just helped us win our biggest contract ever." The boys exchanged triumphant glances, their connection transcending words. "We had a feeling it would work," Brandon said with characteristic confidence. That night, as her sons slept, Gabriella sat in her home office drafting an implementation plan for the government contract. On her desk sat 3 science fair ribbons and a report from the school recommending advanced placement. Her sons' extraordinary gifts were becoming impossible to contain within conventional boundaries. The predictive technology created by 3 10-year-old boys in their basement would become, in just 5 years, the most advanced security system in the world, protecting everything from small businesses to classified government information, while Thompson Enterprises would face the most devastating cyber attack in its history. The predictive technology created by the Triplets would soon transform not only Johnson Tech Solutions, but the entire cybersecurity landscape. 2 years passed in a whirlwind of growth and transformation. Gabriella found herself standing in the elevator of a gleaming midtown Manhattan skyscraper, watching floor numbers climb as she ascended to the new headquarters of Johnson Tech Solutions. At 38, Gabriella commanded a presence that turned heads when she entered rooms. Gone were the days of discount store blazers and sensible shoes from her early entrepreneurial phase. Today she wore a tailored Armani suit, her natural curls styled in a sophisticated updo, diamond studs, a gift to herself after closing their 50th major client, catching the light as she moved. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area where the Johnson Tech Solutions logo dominated the wall in brushed steel. Employees nodded respectfully as she passed, her heels clicking purposefully across the polished floor. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson," her executive assistant greeted. "The quarterly reports are ready for review and the ribbon-cutting ceremony is scheduled for 11. Your son's school called. All three of them aced their advanced placement exams." Gabriella smiled, pride warming her chest. "Thank you, Marcus. Any word from the London office about the EU certification?" "Just came through this morning. We're officially compliant in all 27 member states." The company she had started in a tiny Brooklyn office now occupied 3 floors of prime Manhattan real estate, with satellite offices in Chicago and London. The predictive security algorithm the Triplets had conceived at 10 years old, now refined by professional developers and enhanced with proprietary innovations, had catapulted Johnson Tech Solutions into industry prominence. A financial magazine lay on her desk, its cover featuring a striking photograph of Gabriella against the Manhattan skyline. The headline read, "Johnson Tech Solutions, the meteoric rise of the company, led by single mother Gabriella Johnson." She set it aside without reading the article, having long ago stopped seeking external validation of her journey. That afternoon, Gabriella left the office early for a rare school meeting. All 3 boys' teachers had requested her presence, an unusual enough occurrence to warrant rearranging her schedule. The private academy the Triplets attended catered to gifted students, but even there, her sons stood out dramatically. "Ms. Johnson, thank you for coming," the academic director began once they were seated in the conference room. "We've asked you here because, frankly, we're running out of ways to challenge your sons." 3 separate teachers nodded in agreement, each clutching folders thick with assessments and sample work. Brandon's math teacher spoke first, pushing forward worksheets covered in complex equations. "Brandon completed our entire advanced mathematics curriculum by October. He's now working on university-level differential equations, and to be honest, he's corrected my work twice." Brian's science teacher added, "Brian isn't just understanding the material, he's applying it in ways I've never seen. Last week he rebuilt our lab's spectrometer because he found it inefficient. It now works better than the manufacturer's specifications." Benjamin's humanities teacher smiled slightly. Benjamin's integration of scientific concepts into artistic expression is extraordinary. His analysis of technological impacts on social structures shows understanding that most graduate students haven't developed. The academic director leaned forward. "Ms. Johnson, we're recommending all 3 boys skip 2 grade levels immediately. Additionally, we've contacted several university early admission programs that might be appropriate within the next year or 2. Gabriella absorbed the information, pride mingling with concern. The Triplets, not yet 13, were academically ready for college-level work, but emotionally, they were still children, extraordinarily gifted children who needed guidance navigating their accelerated path. That evening, their upgraded apartment in Soho hummed with activity. The 3-bedroom space, with its high ceilings and expansive windows, reflected their improved circumstances while maintaining the practical comfort Gabriella preferred over ostentation. "Mom, can we convert the guest room into a proper lab?" Brandon asked immediately upon her arrival. "The kitchen table isn't cutting it anymore for our quantum computing project." Brian nodded enthusiastically. "We need dedicated circuit breakers and better ventilation." "And soundproofing," Benjamin added. "The neighbors complained again about the humming from our cooling system." Gabriella hung her coat, noting the scattered components of what appeared to be a partially disassembled supercomputer spread across the living room. "First, hello. Second, homework status?" "Completed yesterday." All three answered simultaneously. "College applications?" she asked, only half joking. Brandon rolled his eyes. "MIT's early admission program requires us to be at least 15, Mom. We researched it already." Later that night, after negotiating boundaries for the home laboratory conversion and checking each boy's advanced coursework, Gabriella settled at her desk with a glass of wine. She absent-mindedly opened her tablet to review some contracts, but a news notification caught her eye. Thomson Enterprises breaks ground on controversial development. CEO Michael Thompson faces community backlash. The photograph showed Michael cutting a ribbon, his trademark confidence still evident though lines now creased his once smooth face. A blonde woman stood slightly apart from him, his third wife, if Gabriella recalled correctly. The second divorce had made minor headlines in business publications. As she moved to close the article, Benjamin appeared in her doorway, his perceptive gaze taking in both her expression and the tablet screen. "Mom, why do you have a file of old news clippings about that man?" Gabriella froze, surprised by the question and the revelation that Benjamin had discovered the folder she occasionally reviewed, not out of lingering attachment, but as a reminder of how far they had come. "Which man?" she asked, playing for time. Benjamin approached, pointing to Michael's image. "This one, Thompson. There's a folder on your cloud drive with articles about him going back years." Gabriella considered her options carefully. The boys had occasionally asked about their father over the years, and she had always provided age-appropriate versions of the truth. He wasn't ready to be a father, they had different life paths, he wasn't a part of their lives. She had never named him or shared the full circumstances of his rejection. "He's someone I knew a long time ago," she said finally. "We were involved briefly before you were born." Benjamin's eyes, identical to his brother's yet somehow more perceptive, studied her face. "Is he our biological father?" The directness of the question shouldn't have surprised her. At 12, the triplets approached everything with analytical precision. Avoiding the truth would only prompt more investigation. "Yes," she acknowledged. "He wasn't ready to be a father, and we went our separate ways before you were born." Benjamin absorbed this information with remarkable composure. "Does he know about us?" "He knew I was pregnant," Gabriella said carefully. "He chose not to be involved." Benjamin nodded, processing. "Does he know what we've accomplished? What you've built?" "I don't believe so," she replied. "We haven't had contact since before you were born." Benjamin considered this, then asked the question that revealed his emotional intelligence exceeded even his analytical gifts. "Are you keeping the articles to remind yourself that you succeeded without him, or to prepare for when he eventually discovers who we are?" Gabriella's breath caught at her son's insight. "Maybe a little of both." The following morning, across Manhattan, Michael Thompson stood at the window of his corner office, scowling at the financial reports spread across his desk. Thomson Enterprises, once the undisputed leader in luxury commercial real estate, had experienced 3 consecutive quarters of declining revenue. The international expansion had encountered regulatory hurdles, development costs had skyrocketed, and competitors were undercutting their bids on prime properties. "Your wife is online too," his assistant announced through the intercom, "and the board members are assembled in the main conference room." "Tell Victoria I'll call her back," Michael snapped, straightening his tie. At 47, he still maintained the handsome features that had graced business magazines, though stress had etched permanent lines around his eyes and mouth. The board meeting was tense, with pointed questions about the company's direction and Michael's leadership. His third marriage was publicly unraveling, with Victoria's displeasure making appearances in society columns and blind items. "The Thompson legacy deserves better stewardship," one board member remarked pointedly as the meeting concluded. That afternoon, Michael's mood darkened further when his assistant informed him that an important cybersecurity contract, one that would have stabilized their technological infrastructure and impressed shareholders, had been awarded to a competitor. "Which firm got it?" he demanded. "Johnson Tech Solutions," his assistant replied, checking her notes. "They're relatively new but growing rapidly. Their predictive security approach apparently impressed the selection committee." Michael dismissed the information without a second thought, the name triggering no recognition. He had more pressing concerns, namely his wife's latest ultimatum about his work hours and the board's increasingly transparent discussions about succession planning. The following week, Gabriella conducted a quarterly all-hands meeting from the company's new auditorium. Standing on the stage in a deep blue dress that contrasted elegantly with her skin, she presented growth projections to nearly 300 employees. "Our predictive security platform now protects over 800 businesses across 17 countries," she announced. "The expansion into healthcare security has exceeded projections by 32%, and our government contracts division has secured 3 major implementations for the coming fiscal year." The metrics were impressive by any standard, but particularly remarkable for a company founded just 5 years earlier. Afterward, Gabriella met with her executive team to discuss their most ambitious expansion yet. "The Asian market represents our greatest growth opportunity," her international director explained, "particularly Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, where cybersecurity concerns are driving unprecedented investment." As the meeting concluded, Gabriella's phone chimed with a message from Brandon. "Finished coding the emotional recognition module for Security System 4. 97% accuracy in test environment. Brian optimized hardware requirements. Benjamin created visualization that actually makes sense to non-technical users. Can we patent it?" A smile touched her lips as she typed back, "Schedule meeting with legal team next week. Proud of you all." The triplets, despite their accelerated academic path, remained children in many ways. Brilliant, occasionally maddening children whose innovations were becoming increasingly central to the company's success. That evening, as Gabriella reviewed acquisition proposals in her home office, her executive assistant called with unexpected news. "We've received a meeting request from Thomson Enterprises," he reported. "Their technology division wants to discuss potential partnership opportunities." Gabriella's hand stilled on her keyboard. "Thomson Enterprises? Did they specify what kind of partnership?" "Their infrastructure apparently suffered a significant security breach last quarter. They're looking to overhaul their entire approach, possibly license our predictive system." A strange sense of completion washed over Gabriella. After 12 years of building, growing, and succeeding without a backward glance, Michael Thompson's company now sought what she had created. "Schedule the meeting for next week," she instructed. "But don't have me attend personally. Send Diane from business development. I'd like to see what they're proposing before getting directly involved." 2 days later, Gabriella received Diane's report on the Thomson Enterprises meeting. Michael hadn't attended personally, sending his technology director instead. The proposal sought a substantial discount on Johnson Tech Solutions' premium security package, offering partnership visibility and co-branding opportunities instead of standard pricing. In her office, Gabriella drafted the formal rejection letter herself, her typing speed matching the efficient rhythm of her thoughts. The language was professionally courteous but firm. Johnson Tech Solutions did not offer discounted services in exchange for brand association, regardless of the partner's market position. As she signed the letter, Gabriella experienced a quiet sense of satisfaction, not vindictive pleasure, but the simple acknowledgement of how completely their positions had reversed. The woman he had once declared too ordinary for his world now led a company his enterprise sought to partner with. "Send my regards to Mr. Thompson," she added to the standard closing, the only personal touch in an otherwise perfectly professional rejection. The letter of partnership rejection that Michael barely noticed, signed with Gabriella Johnson's elegant handwriting, would remain in his drawer for another 3 years, until the night he recognized her at the Metropolitan Gala and understood the empire that had grown in the shadows of his contempt. The letter of partnership rejection remained in Michael Thompson's drawer for 3 years, barely registering as a blip in his consciousness. Meanwhile, the Johnson Tech Solutions logo illuminated the Manhattan skyline, visible from the windows of Thompson Enterprises, a daily reminder of a connection neither company officially acknowledged. Gabriella stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office on the 45th floor, watching dawn break over the East River. At 41, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built an empire through intelligence and determination rather than inheritance or connections. Her reflection in the glass, designer suit perfectly tailored to her athletic frame, natural curls styled in a sophisticated updo, subtle makeup enhancing rather than masking her features, bore little resemblance to the exhausted young woman who had once trudged through snow to a subway station, pregnant and abandoned. "The acquisition numbers look promising," she murmured, reviewing the tablet in her hand. The latest company Johnson Tech Solutions was absorbing would expand their healthcare security division significantly, bringing their total valuation to $4.8 billion. The figures still occasionally struck her as surreal, numbers that belonged to the world she had once served drinks in, not commanded. The intercom on her desk chimed softly. "Ms. Johnson, your video conference with Tokyo begins in 5 minutes, and your sons have confirmed they'll be here at 6 o'clock to accompany you to the Metropolitan Gala." "Thank you, Elise," Gabriella replied, moving to her desk to prepare for the call. The Metropolitan Gala. The irony wasn't lost on her. 15 years earlier, she had served canapés at Manhattan's elite social events, invisible except when someone needed a refill. Tonight, she would be honored for her philanthropic work transforming public schools in Harlem and Brooklyn with cutting-edge technology labs. The same society that would have rejected her relationship with Michael now courted her presence, competed for her attention, celebrated her achievements. The video conference proceeded efficiently, with Japanese executives eager to implement Johnson Tech Solutions' predictive security across their banking infrastructure. Throughout the call, Gabriella's thoughts occasionally drifted to the evening ahead, not from anxiety about the honor, but from awareness of its significance in her journey. After concluding the call, Gabriella reviewed the speech she would deliver that night. It would be the first time she spoke publicly about her path, not mentioning Michael by name, but acknowledging the obstacles that had shaped her determination. The carefully crafted words balanced vulnerability with strength, offering inspiration without self-aggrandizement. A gentle knock at her office door interrupted her review. Marcus entered, carrying a garment bag. "Your stylists have arrived. They've set up in the executive lounge." 3 hours later, as a team of professionals made final adjustments to her Valentino gown, a striking crimson creation that hugged her curves before flowing dramatically to the floor, Gabriella's phone chimed with a text from Benjamin. "Mom, can I add a few lines about the mentorship program for single mothers in technology?" A smile touched her lips as she responded, "Of course, my love. It's the project I'm most proud of." The mentorship initiative had begun 2 years earlier, providing technology training, childcare, and job placement for single mothers from underserved communities. Unlike most corporate philanthropy, which often prioritized publicity over impact, Gabriella had designed the program based on personal experience, creating what she had needed during those early years of struggle. "The car service has confirmed they'll have 3 vehicles," Marcus informed her. "1 for you and the boys, 2 for your security team." Gabriella nodded absently, remembering days when she had calculated subway tokens carefully to ensure she could get to work. The security detail, a necessity given her company's government contracts and her increasing public profile, still felt excessive, though she had reluctantly accepted its necessity after a concerning incident at a conference the previous year. As evening approached, Gabriella returned home to prepare for the triplets' arrival. The duplex penthouse in Soho reflected her success while maintaining the practical comfort she valued over ostentation. Art from local creators adorned walls rather than famous names, though several pieces had subsequently become valuable as their creators gained recognition, often through the arts foundation she had established. At precisely 6 o'clock, the elevator announced an arrival. The doors opened to reveal three identical young men in perfectly tailored tuxedos, each carrying small gift boxes. At 15, the triplets had grown tall, already matching Gabriella's 5'8" height and still growing. Years of access to excellent nutrition and healthcare had erased any trace of their premature birth. Each boy had developed a distinct style despite their identical features. Brandon wore his hair slightly shorter, his posture reflecting the confidence that bordered on arrogance. Brian favored rimless glasses that subtly emphasized his analytical gaze. Benjamin wore a single small earring, a black diamond stud that hinted at his artistic sensibilities. "Happy Gala Day," Benjamin said, embracing his mother. "You look stunning," Brandon added, studying her dress with appreciative precision. Brian handed her his gift box first. We coordinated. Inside each box, Gabriella found accessories clearly chosen with thought. From Brandon, a sleek clutch in the exact shade of her dress. From Brian, a technologically advanced smartwatch disguised as vintage jewelry. From Benjamin, handcrafted earrings that complemented the necklace she had already selected. "You three are extraordinary," she said, genuine emotion coloring her voice. "These are perfect." "Harvard sent their formal acceptance yesterday," Brandon announced casually, adjusting his cufflinks. "Full scholarship." "MIT confirmed this morning," Brian added. "They're particularly interested in my quantum encryption project." Benjamin smiled slightly. "Stanford admissions called personally. They want to create a specialized program combining technological innovation with artistic expression." Gabriella absorbed the news with a complex mixture of pride and wistfulness. Her 15-year-old sons would soon depart for prestigious universities that rarely accepted students so young. The academic acceleration had been inevitable given their extraordinary abilities, but emotionally, they remained teenagers. Brilliant, occasionally arrogant, still needing guidance despite their intellectual independence. "I'm incredibly proud of you all," she said, embracing each son in turn. "Tonight we'll celebrate properly." The drive to the Metropolitan Museum of Art passed in comfortable conversation, the boys discussing their latest projects while Gabriella mentally reviewed her speech. As their limousine joined the line of vehicles disgorging Manhattan's elite onto the red carpet, Benjamin reached for her hand. "Nervous?" he asked, his perceptive gaze catching what his brothers missed. "Not nervous," she corrected gently. "Reflective. This night represents a full-circle moment for me." The red carpet experience was still relatively new for the Johnson family, though they had attended increasing numbers of high-profile events as the company's prominence grew. Photographers called Gabriella's name, fashion commentators noted her Valentino gown, and business reporters shouted questions about Johnson Tech Solutions' latest acquisition. The triplets handled the attention with practiced ease, their identical faces and exceptional poise making them immediate objects of fascination. Inside the museum's grand entrance hall, New York's most influential figures circulated in designer finery. Tech billionaires mingled with old money families. Politicians conversed with celebrities, all against the backdrop of priceless art and architectural splendor. "Ms. Johnson, the committee would like a word before your introduction," an event coordinator whispered, guiding Gabriella toward a private reception area. As she followed, Gabriella caught sight of a familiar profile across the room, a face she hadn't seen in person for 15 years, though she had occasionally glimpsed it in business publications or society pages. Michael Thompson stood near the bar, older but still recognizable, his once dark hair now salted with gray, his face bearing lines of stress that hadn't existed when she knew him. He didn't notice her, engrossed in what appeared to be an uncomfortable conversation with a board member. The sight of him triggered no emotional response beyond mild curiosity, like encountering a character from a book she had read long ago rather than the man who had once shattered her world. When Gabriella rejoined her sons after meeting with the committee, she found them surrounded by admirers, university representatives, tech industry leaders, and the occasional starstruck peer from their academic competitions. "Mother, Mr. Chen was just telling us about the early days of your company." Brandon said as she approached, using the formal mother he adopted in public settings. David Chen, now a successful tech entrepreneur himself thanks to the algorithms Gabriella had developed, smiled warmly. "I was explaining how your mother saved my company from bankruptcy with her payment security innovation. These young men seem to have inherited your talent for seeing patterns others miss." The evening proceeded with perfect coordination, the museum's staff orchestrating the complex ballet of dinner service and program transitions. Gabriella conversed easily with those seated at her table, a Supreme Court justice, 2 tech pioneers, and a renowned neurosurgeon, while keeping an attentive eye on her sons, who had been seated at a neighboring table with young entrepreneurs and academic achievers. As coffee was served, Gabriella noticed Brandon studying something, or someone, across the room with unusual intensity. Following his gaze, she realized he was observing Michael, who now stood alone by a window, checking his phone with evident frustration. Before she could process this observation, the museum director approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're honored tonight to recognize an individual whose contributions to technology and education are transforming opportunities for underserved communities." Gabriella composed herself, pushing thoughts of Michael aside as she prepared for her introduction. "Our honoree grew Johnson Tech Solutions from a small startup to a global security leader valued at nearly $5 billion. More importantly, she has leveraged that success to create technological access for thousands of students in Harlem and Brooklyn through her foundation's innovation labs. Please welcome our 2024 Metropolitan Gala honoree for transformative innovation, Ms. Gabriella Johnson." As applause filled the grand hall, Gabriella rose and moved toward the stage with measured grace. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Michael's attention suddenly fixed on the podium, his expression shifting from distraction to confusion to dawning recognition. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded room, a microsecond of connection that bridged 15 years of separate existences. In that instant, Gabriella saw surprise register on his face, followed by disbelief as his gaze darted between her and the triplets seated at their table. Ascending the steps to the stage, Gabriella felt a strange sense of completion. The journey from that snowy night to this gleaming triumph had been arduous, but transformative. As she took her place at the podium, adjusting the microphone with steady hands adorned with the simple diamond bracelet she had bought herself after her first $1 million contract, she knew that whatever happened next had already been shaped by every choice that had led to this moment. While the limousine of the Johnson family headed to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Michael Thompson adjusted his bow tie in the event bathroom, completely unaware that in the coming hours his world would collapse upon recognizing not only the woman he had abandoned, but also the 3 brilliant young men who shared his DNA and whom he had rejected before they were even born. The Metropolitan Museum of Art glowed with strategic lighting, transforming the historic building into a luminous beacon atop the iconic steps. A red carpet stretched along the grand staircase, where New York's elite paraded in gala attire, their silhouettes outlined against the museum's classical facade. Camera flashes punctuated the evening like lightning, capturing the familiar faces of power, influence, and wealth. Gabriella Johnson stepped out of her limousine, her crimson Valentino gown catching the light with each movement. The triplets emerged behind her, their identical faces and impeccable tuxedos creating an immediate stir among the photographers. Even in a crowd accustomed to celebrity, the striking image of Gabriella, flanked by her 3 handsome sons, commanded attention. "Ms. Johnson, look this way. Brandon, Brian, Benjamin, over here." The family navigated the carpet with practiced ease, pausing for photographs while deflecting personal questions with polite smiles. Benjamin, ever attuned to his mother's emotions, noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, not nervousness about the crowd, but awareness of the evening's significance. "You're making history tonight, Mom," he murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Inside the grand hall, Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements. Museum masterpieces gazed down from the walls, silent witnesses to the social performance unfolding beneath them. Waitstaff in formal attire circulated with champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres, their movements choreographed to appear effortless. In a discreet corner of the main hall, Michael Thompson adjusted his bow tie while scanning the guest list on his phone. The past few years had not been kind to the Thompson heir. His once commanding presence had diminished, subtle signs of strain evident in the tightness around his eyes and the slight sag beneath his jawline. His tuxedo, though expertly tailored, couldn't disguise the tension in his posture as he scrolled through names, searching for potential allies or investors. "Third-quarter projections are worse than expected," muttered the board member beside him, voice low to avoid being overheard. "The Rivera contract falling through has made the shareholders nervous." Michael forced a confident smile. "The government security contract will stabilize things. Our bid is strong." The board member's expression suggested otherwise, but he merely sipped his champagne. "The competition has been aggressive. That new tech company, the security specialists, they've been undercutting everyone." "We're Thompsons," Michael replied, the family name invoked like a talisman. "We've weathered worse." Across the room, Gabriella accepted a sparkling water from a passing server, her attention focused on the museum director approaching with the evening's program. She didn't notice Michael's presence, but Brandon, ever observant, had already conducted a subtle survey of the room, his analytical mind cataloging faces and connections with effortless precision. "Interesting crowd tonight," he commented, accepting a canapé from a silver tray. "That man by the Greco-Roman exhibit keeps looking at our table." Brian followed his brother's gaze. "Thompson Enterprises CEO. They lost the West Side development bid last month. Stock dropped 12%. Benjamin studied the distant figure with artist's eyes. "He looks familiar somehow." Before they could discuss further, the museum director tapped the microphone, calling for attention. The crowd gradually quieted, conversations tapering off as guests found their assigned seats. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our annual Metropolitan Gala, celebrating those who have made extraordinary contributions to New York's cultural and social landscape." Gabriella sat with perfect posture at the honored guests' table, her sons seated at a nearby table with young achievers and emerging philanthropists. As the introductory speeches proceeded, Brandon continued his surreptitious observation of Michael Thompson, noting the man's increasing distraction as he checked his phone repeatedly, his expression growing more frustrated with each glance. "And now," announced the director, "please welcome our special honoree for the evening's recognition of technological innovation in education. Her Johnson Tech Solutions has revolutionized cybersecurity, while her foundation has transformed educational opportunities for thousands of underprivileged students." The name hung in the air for a moment before penetrating Michael's consciousness. Johnson. A common enough surname, yet something about the context nagged at him. He looked up from his phone, attention finally captured. The incomparable Gabriella Johnson. Polite applause erupted, guests rising in standing ovation as Gabriella moved toward the stage with graceful confidence. The spotlight caught her features, illuminating her radiant smile and the quiet authority she carried effortlessly. Michael froze, champagne glass suspended halfway to his lips. Recognition dawned slowly, then crashed over him in a disorienting wave. Impossible. Yet there she was, unmistakably the woman he had dismissed from his penthouse 15 years earlier, now commanding the attention of the very society he had insisted would never accept her. The champagne flute slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a crystalline crash. Heads turned at the disruption, including Gabriella's. For the first time in 15 years, their eyes met across the crowded room. A microsecond of surprise flickered across her features before being replaced by cool recognition. She recovered instantly, continuing her gracious acknowledgement of the applause as she ascended to the stage. Michael remained rooted in place, champagne seeping into his handmade Italian shoes as a server hurried to clean the mess. Gabriella's voice, confident and measured, filled the hall as she began her acceptance speech. Michael stared, transfixed by the transformation. The young hotel manager he had known was gone, replaced by this commanding presence whose success was being celebrated by the very elite he had assured her she could never join. But it was the three young men at the nearby table that truly captured his attention. Identical faces, handsome and self-possessed, with features that triggered an unsettling sense of recognition. The calculated smiles, the slight dimple on the left cheek, the characteristic tilt of the head, all eerily familiar from his own youthful photographs. "How old are they?" he whispered to himself, mental calculations spinning. 15 years since that night. 9 months gestation. The timing aligned with devastating precision. Brandon, ever alert to being observed, noticed Michael's intense scrutiny. With the bold confidence of youth and privilege, he excused himself from his table and approached the older man, his movements casual yet purposeful. "You seem quite interested in my mother," Brandon remarked, his tone conversational but his eyes sharp with assessment. Michael struggled to compose himself, suddenly face to face with a younger version of features he recognized from his mirror. We worked together, long ago." "Is that so?" Brandon studied him with penetrating intensity. "Interesting. I'm Brandon Johnson, and these are my brothers, Brian and Benjamin." He gestured toward the other two young men, who had noticed the exchange and were now approaching with identical feline grace. "We've recently been accepted to Harvard, MIT, and Stanford, respectively," Brandon continued, his tone casually matter-of-fact, as though discussing the weather rather than extraordinary academic achievements. Michael felt each word like a physical blow. The similarities, the age, the timing, every detail aligned into devastating confirmation. "You're triplets?" The question emerged barely audible. "Exactly," Brian confirmed, his analytical gaze dissecting Michael's reaction with scientific precision. "We were born in October of 2009. The mental arithmetic was automatic and damning. 9 months after January of 2009. 9 months after the check. 9 months after the abandonment." Michael's complexion paled to a sickly gray as blood drained from his face. The room seemed to tilt slightly, forcing him to steady himself against a nearby column. "Mr. Thompson? Michael Thompson?" Benjamin's voice contained a note of recognition that heightened Michael's alarm. "I researched your Senate campaign for my political science project. Your name appeared frequently in my analysis of local politicians." Before Michael could formulate a response, Gabriella materialized beside her sons, her presence somehow both protective and commanding. She placed a gentle hand on Benjamin's shoulder, her gesture simultaneously maternal and territorial. "Michael," she acknowledged, her voice cool and controlled as Arctic air. "What a surprise to find you still trying to secure that Senate seat. I heard your company has been struggling since losing the government contract to mine." The revelation struck Michael like lightning. "It was you? Johnson Tech Solutions is your company?" "Built from nothing," she confirmed with a calculated smile that never reached her eyes. "Created while raising 3 sons alone." The tension between them was palpable, curious glances now turning toward the group as other guests sensed the unfolding drama. Brandon, with his acute perception, studied Michael's face with increasing comprehension, the pieces falling into place. "Mother, this man seems familiar," he observed, the resemblance between his own features and Michael's becoming painfully obvious under the ballroom's unforgiving lights. Gabriella maintained her impeccable composure. "Perhaps it's time you learned a part of our history I've preserved until you were mature enough to understand it." The orchestra struck up a fanfare, announcing the moment for the honoree's formal address and temporarily rescuing Michael from the impending revelation. As Gabriella turned toward the stage, Michael made a desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Gabriella, please, we need to talk. I didn't know. If you had known what?" Benjamin interrupted, his typically gentle demeanor suddenly sharp. "That we existed? Or that Mother would become more successful than you ever dreamed?" Michael opened his mouth but found no words. The confident dealmaker, the persuasive politician, the commanding CEO, all these personas deserted him as he faced the consequences of his decision 15 years earlier. On stage, Gabriella adjusted the microphone, her poise commanding immediate silence throughout the hall. 15 years ago, I served tables at events like this to support my unborn children. Today, Johnson Tech Solutions employs over 3,000 people, has revolutionized global cybersecurity, and is worth more than several real estate empires in this city combined. Her eyes found Michael's as she continued, her gaze direct and unflinching. 15 years ago, a man in this room told me I was insufficient, a burden who would never belong in his world. Today, that same man has just discovered that my children, whom he rejected before they were even born, are the biological heirs he never managed to have with any of the 3 wives who left him. A sepulchral silence fell over the grand hall. Cell phones rose discreetly, capturing the moment when Senate candidate Michael Thompson visibly paled under the brilliant lights, while 3 identical young men stared at him with dawning comprehension on their faces. While Gabriella's voice continued strong and clear through the sound system, Michael felt the foundation of his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. The sons he never knew existed, sons who carried his genetic legacy while bearing another man's name, stood before him, their extraordinary achievements and potentials suddenly, devastatingly clear. As understanding spread across the triplets' identical faces, Michael Thompson finally comprehended the magnitude of what he had rejected 15 years ago. Not just an extraordinary woman, but 3 brilliant heirs who carried his blood and who had grown up without needing his name, his money, or his approval. As Gabriella ascended the stage, a hush fell over the grand hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The spotlight embraced her like an old friend, illuminating the crimson Valentino dress that cascaded around her form in waves reminiscent of power rather than frivolity. She stood before the microphone, her composure absolute despite the emotional earthquake that had just transpired across the room. "Thank you for this honor," she began, her voice clear and measured. 15 years ago, I stood in this very building, though you wouldn't have noticed me then. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the unexpected personal turn from a woman known for her professional reserve. "I was serving canapés at an event much like this one," Gabriella continued, "calculating how many extra shifts I would need to cover my rent that month. I was invisible to most of you, just another uniform moving efficiently between conversations that would shape industries I couldn't hope to enter." In the audience, Michael Thompson remained frozen, his complexion ashen as he realized the trajectory of her speech. Around him, New York's elite listened with rapt attention, unaware that the story's antagonist stood among them. "That same year, someone told me I was insufficient, that I would never belong in certain circles, never be accepted at galas or in boardrooms." Gabriella's eyes briefly found Michael's across the room. "That I was, to use his exact words, too ordinary for the legacy he envisioned." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The triplets sat perfectly still, their identical faces displaying varying emotions. Brandon's calculating assessment, Brian's analytical processing, and Benjamin's deep empathy. "I could have believed those words," Gabriella said, her voice strengthening. "They came from someone with power, wealth, and every advantage I lacked. Instead, I chose to take those words as a challenge." She gestured toward the screen behind her, which displayed images of the technology centers her foundation had established in schools across Harlem and Brooklyn. Bright spaces filled with children working on advanced equipment, their faces alight with possibility. "Johnson Tech Solutions now employs over 3,000 people. We protect government infrastructure, healthcare systems, and small businesses alike. But the achievement that matters most to me isn't measured in market valuation or contracts secured. The screen changed to show students from her mentorship program, young women, many of them single mothers, graduating with technology certifications, their children proudly at their sides. It's measured in opportunities created for those who were told, as I was, that certain doors weren't meant for them to walk through. Michael shifted uncomfortably, acutely aware of several gazes turning curiously in his direction as pieces of recognition began to form among the most perceptive guests. 15 years ago, Gabriella continued, her voice taking on a quiet intensity that commanded absolute attention, I learned I was expecting triplets. When I shared this news with their father, he offered me a check for $20,000 to solve the problem and informed me that a black hotel employee from Brooklyn with his children would ruin his political and business future. The silence in the hall deepened, tension crackling through the air as guests exchanged shocked glances. Several prominent eyes now turned directly toward Michael, whose reputation for political ambitions was well known. That night, as I rode the subway home in a January snowstorm, I made a promise to my unborn sons that they would never measure their worth by anyone else's estimation, that they would grow up knowing they were more than sufficient, more than enough, more than ordinary. On the screens, photos of the triplets appeared, professional portraits showing 3 handsome young men in matching navy suits, their confident smiles radiating intelligence and purpose. Today, those 3 boys have been accepted to Harvard, MIT, and Stanford at age 15. They've developed security protocols that protect critical infrastructure across this country. They've created art that explores the intersection of technology and humanity. They've done all this without ever knowing the identity of the man who considered them an inconvenience to be erased from existence. Camera phones rose throughout the audience, capturing the moment. In the spotlight, Gabriella stood tall, her achievement not merely professional but deeply personal, the ultimate repudiation of the dismissal she had once endured. "That man is in this room tonight," she said, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the hushed hall. "He's discovering for the first time that the boys he rejected before they were born are the biological heirs he never managed to have with any of his 3 ex-wives." A wave of whispers surged through the crowd. Michael remained rigidly in place, unable to retreat from the public revelation unfolding around him. Several guests who had pieced together the narrative now stared openly between him and the triplets, noting the unmistakable resemblance. "I don't share this story seeking sympathy or to embarrass anyone," Gabriella continued, reclaiming the audience's attention. "I share it because too many talented people are told they don't belong in rooms like this one. Too many brilliant minds are dismissed because they don't fit someone else's vision of what success should look like." She gestured to the mentorship program graduates displayed on screen. "Every person who has been told they're insufficient carries within them the potential to redefine what sufficiency means. Every child from Brooklyn or Harlem or Queens deserves to know that their zip code doesn't determine their capacity for greatness." The audience rose in a standing ovation, emotions sweeping through the hall. Only Michael remained seated, the full weight of his past choices crushing down upon him as he watched the woman he had discarded being celebrated by the very society he had insisted would never accept her. As Gabriella returned to her table, accepting congratulations and handshakes, the triplets approached her with expressions of stunned recognition. Brandon, the most assertive, spoke first. "Mother, was that—" he began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "Yes," Gabriella replied simply. "I had planned to tell you privately after the event, but when I saw him here, I realized the truth deserved to be acknowledged publicly." Brian studied his mother's face with analytical precision. "The statistical probability of encountering him tonight of all nights seems impossibly low." "Sometimes the universe has a peculiar sense of timing," Gabriella replied, squeezing his hand. Benjamin, always the most emotionally perceptive, watched Michael across the room. "He looks broken." "His choices have consequences," Gabriella said gently. "As do mine. As will yours." The evening continued with dinner service and musical performances, but an electric undercurrent now charged the atmosphere. Michael remained at his table, declined dessert, and nursed a scotch with mechanical movements. Occasionally he glanced toward the Johnson family, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that might have been regret. As the formal program concluded and guests began to circulate again, Michael finally rose and made his way toward Gabriella's table. The crowd parted subtly before him, awareness of the unfolding drama creating a bubble of space around the impending confrontation. "Gabriella," he said, his voice lacking its customary confidence, "may I speak with you privately?" She regarded him coolly, neither rising nor inviting him to sit. "I don't believe we have anything to discuss that can't be said here." The triplets formed a protective semicircle around their mother, their identical features now unmistakably reflecting aspects of the man before them. Michael began, unable to complete the sentence as he stared at the three young men. "Your biological sons," Gabriella finished for him. "Yes." Benjamin studied Michael with artistic precision. "You have the same vertical crease between your eyebrows when you're concerned. Brandon has that exact expression." Brian adjusted his glasses with scientific detachment. "Our genetic profile suggests a 78% probability of inherited intellectual capacity from both maternal and paternal lines, though environmental factors have clearly been the dominant influence in our development." Brandon said nothing, his assessment silent but penetrating as he catalogued every detail of the man who had contributed to his existence but nothing to his upbringing. "I didn't know," Michael finally managed, the words hollow even to his own ears. "If I had known—" "You knew I was pregnant," Gabriella interrupted, her voice quiet but unyielding. "You made your choice with full awareness of what you were rejecting." Around them, guests pretended not to listen while straining to catch every word. Camera phones captured discrete footage that would dominate social media within hours. "I was young, focused on my career, my family expectations." Michael's justifications withered under Gabriella's steady gaze. "I was 26, without family connections, without financial security," she countered. "Excuses don't become more valid with wealth attached to them." Benjamin, always the peacemaker, asked the question his brothers left unspoken. "Did you ever think about us? About what might have happened to us?" Michael's expression crumpled slightly, the practiced political mask slipping to reveal genuine distress. "I convinced myself it had been handled, that the pregnancy had been terminated. It was easier to believe that than to consider alternatives." "Easier for you," Brandon observed, his first direct words to his biological father cutting with surgical precision. A photographer approached, sensing the historic nature of the confrontation. "Ms. Johnson, would you and your family allow a photo?" Before Gabriella could respond, the photographer added, "And perhaps Mr. Thompson would join you as a longtime supporter of the arts?" The deliberate misinterpretation of their connection hung in the air. Michael looked toward Gabriella, a question in his eyes, a request for mercy she had no obligation to grant. After a moment's consideration, Gabriella nodded. "One photograph, for historical accuracy." They arranged themselves with practiced ease. Gabriella seated, the triplets standing behind her, Michael awkwardly positioned at the edge of the frame. The flash captured a tableau of genetic connection and emotional distance, of success achieved and opportunity squandered. As the photographer thanked them and moved away, Michael made one final attempt. "Gabriella, the boys, they're extraordinary. I would like the chance to know them." "That decision belongs to them," she replied. "They're old enough to determine what relationship, if any, they wish to have with you." The triplets exchanged glances, their silent communication honed by 15 years of shared existence. Brandon spoke for all three, his tone neither hostile nor welcoming. We'll consider it. But understand this. We don't need a father. We never have." As Michael nodded and retreated, photojournalists captured the moment the once mighty Thompson heir walked away from the family he had rejected, now forced to acknowledge them before the very society whose judgment he had once feared. The headlines that would dominate the press the next morning wouldn't just celebrate Gabriella Johnson's philanthropy, but would mercilessly scrutinize Michael Thompson's fall, not because of his rejection 15 years earlier, but because of the stark contrast between the empire she had built and what he had lost. Dawn broke over Manhattan, bathing the city in a harsh light that matched the unforgiving headlines splashed across every news outlet. "Thompson heir exposed. Abandoned mother of prodigy triplets," declared the New York Times front page. "Tech billionaire reveals past rejection by Thompson scion," announced the Wall Street Journal. Social media platforms erupted with the story. Video clips of Gabriella's speech shared millions of times overnight, transforming her into a symbol of resilience while casting Michael as the embodiment of toxic privilege. In the Johnson penthouse in Soho, the morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the three identical young men gathered around the kitchen island. Brandon methodically arranged newspaper clippings about Michael Thompson in chronological order, his analytical mind creating patterns from the fragmented history of their biological father. Brian sat cross-legged on a bar stool, tablet in hand, scrolling through Thompson Enterprises' financial reports with the detached interest of a scientist studying a specimen. Benjamin, perched on the windowsill, sketched furiously in his notebook, his pencil capturing the conflicted emotions he couldn't yet verbalize. His company's stock dropped 17% in after-hours trading, Brian noted without looking up. Preliminary projections suggest continued decline when markets open. Brandon nodded, adding another clipping to his timeline. 3 failed Senate campaigns, 3 failed marriages, pattern of initial success followed by self-sabotage. Interesting psychological profile. Benjamin remained silent, his pencil moving in swift, sure strokes across the page. On the paper, a man's face emerged, fractured, one half showing confident arrogance, the other crumbling into uncertainty. Gabriella entered the living area, already dressed for the day in a tailored navy suit that spoke of authority without ostentation. She paused, taking in the scene of her sons processing the revelation in their characteristic ways. "Why didn't you ever tell us, Mother?" Brandon finally asked, looking up from his collection of articles. Gabriella sat on the sofa, choosing her words carefully. "Because I didn't want you to grow up defined by rejection," she answered honestly. "I wanted you to know your worth before you learned the story of someone who wasn't capable of seeing it." The triplets absorbed this, each processing it through their unique perspective. Benjamin finally closed his sketchbook and asked the question that hovered beneath their analysis. "Were you waiting for this moment? All these years?" "Not waiting, no," Gabriella replied. "But I always knew it might come. New York is smaller than it seems, especially at certain levels of success." The penthouse intercom chimed, interrupting their conversation. The security desk announced an unexpected visitor in the lobby, Michael Thompson, requesting 5 minutes of their time. "Should I send him away?" the security officer asked, the question weighted with protective concern. Gabriella looked to her sons, the decision clearly theirs to make. The triplets exchanged glances, their silent communication honed by 15 years of shared existence. "We're curious," Brian admitted, adjusting his glasses in the gesture that signaled his scientific interest had been piqued. Objectively speaking, it would be informative to observe him directly. 20 minutes later, Michael Thompson stood in the luxurious living room of the Johnson penthouse, looking distinctly uncomfortable and diminished. His designer suit, once a symbol of his superiority, now seemed to hang slightly loose on his frame. In his hands, he clutched a thick envelope, his knuckles white with tension. "I came to legally recognize, to establish a substantial trust fund to compensate." Michael's practiced eloquence abandoned him under the steady gaze of the three young men who shared his features. "Compensate for what exactly?" Brandon interrupted, his tone precise as a surgeon's blade. "The 15 years of absence? The words you said to our mother? Or are you trying to buy your way back into our lives now that we're convenient for your public image?" Michael paled visibly. "I made the worst mistake of my life that day. If I could go back—" "But you can't," Benjamin said softly, breaking his contemplative silence. "Just as you can't erase the consequences. Your company stock has lost 23% of its value since last night. Your Senate aspirations are finished. 3 ex-wives have already given interviews confirming your inability to father children due to a condition you concealed from them." The precision of the information made Michael stagger slightly. "How do you know about that?" "We're Gabriella Johnson's sons," Brian replied simply. "Information is our specialty." Gabriella, who had been observing the interaction from a position near the windows, finally spoke. "What do you really want, Michael? Why are you here?" "I want a chance," he admitted. All traces of the arrogance she had once known completely vanished. "To know them, to be part of—" "Part of what?" she asked. "Our success story? The empire I built while you destroyed yours? The boys have extraordinary male role models in their lives. Teachers, mentors, the uncle who took them fishing when they were 6. You aren't necessary, Michael. You never were." Benjamin rose and walked to the small wooden box on the bookshelf. From it, he removed a yellowed fragment of paper, the piece of the check with Michael's signature. "Mother kept this to show us that our value could never be calculated in dollars, and to remember that the $4.8 billion empire she built began with the decision to keep us against all odds." He handed the fragment to Michael, a symbolic gesture of return. "There is no place for you in our lives," Brandon stated, rising to his feet, "not out of vengeance or anger, but because we simply don't need you." "Our family is complete," Brian added. "It always has been." When the security officer escorted Michael to the elevator, he seemed to have aged a decade in an hour. In the lobby, reporters had already gathered, alerted by some anonymous source about his visit. As the elevator doors closed on Michael's defeated expression, Gabriella felt a complex emotion wash over her. Not satisfaction at his downfall, but a quiet acknowledgement that justice sometimes arrived in unexpected forms. That evening, while the Johnson family gathered around their dining table celebrating the Triplets' university acceptance letters, Michael Thompson sat alone in his penthouse, signing papers transferring operational control of Thompson Enterprises to the administrative board. His phone remained silent. No political allies, no society friends, none of his ex-wives reached out. "I've been thinking about expanding the mentorship program," Benjamin said, passing a bowl of pasta to his brother. "Perhaps opening it to fathers as well?" Brandon raised an eyebrow. "Statistically, single mothers face greater economic barriers to entering tech fields." "True," Benjamin acknowledged, "but perhaps we could create a separate track for fathers who want to be more engaged with their children while pursuing career advancement." Gabriella observed her sons with quiet pride. Even in their moment of personal turmoil, they thought of how to expand opportunity for others. "Whatever you decide," she said, "the foundation will support it." Brian, always practical, added, "Harvard's entrepreneurship program has expressed interest in using our mentorship model as a case study. We could leverage that for additional funding." As they discussed possibilities for growth, Gabriella's phone chimed with a news alert. Thompson Enterprises board had announced emergency restructuring, with Michael Thompson stepping down from operational leadership. She dismissed the notification without comment. Michael's trajectory no longer intersected with their lives in any meaningful way. Later that night, in her office at Johnson Tech Solutions, Gabriella finalized details for expanding her foundation's reach. On her desk sat a framed photograph, 3 newborn infants cradled in her arms in the tiny Harlem apartment. Beside it stood a recent portrait of the triplets in formal attire, their intelligent eyes and confident smiles reflecting the extraordinary young men they had become. Her gaze moved between the images, measuring the distance traveled in 15 years. The journey from that snowy night when Michael had declared her insufficient to this moment of absolute fulfillment had been arduous but transformative. Across the city, Michael sat alone in his darkened penthouse, a glass of scotch untouched before him. On his screen, article after article dissected his fall from grace. Not just the revelation at the gala, but the pattern of failed relationships, questionable business decisions, and thwarted political ambitions that had preceded it. One journalist had even uncovered court records of a sealed lawsuit from his second wife, alleging he had concealed his infertility before their marriage. Michael closed the browser and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. In the distance, the illuminated sign of Johnson Tech Solutions glowed against the night sky, a beacon of success built by the woman he had discarded as ordinary. In her office, Gabriella signed the final approval for a new initiative: emergency childcare centers attached to each of her foundation's training facilities, ensuring that no parent would have to choose between caring for their child and pursuing education. As she sat back in her chair, she realized she felt no hatred for Michael, not even satisfaction at his downfall. What she felt was simply the completion of a cycle, the confirmation of what she had always known. She was more than sufficient. She always had been. As night fell over Manhattan, two parallel realities unfolded in the same city. On one side, an empire built on rejection and prejudice crumbled. On the other, a family forged in love and determination moved forward, complete in itself, illuminating the future with its own brilliance. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.